the impact of cyberbullying, because of these unique characteristics that we're just starting to learn more about, can be quite a bit more detrimental.
Welcome to Talking About Kids. I'm your host, R. Bradley Snyder, researcher, activist, and author of The 5 Simple Truths of Raising Kids. If you are a parent or an educator or you work with kids in any capacity, then it is likely that you are frustrated by how difficult it can be to protect kids from cyberbullying. Maybe you've tried parental controls or even gatekeeper apps just to have them bypassed. You might have even had to remove restrictions on your kids' devices just to get them to be able to do schoolwork. Like I said, it can be very frustrating. Well, there is hope. And my guests today, Yasin Silva, the director of the Data Science Graduate Program at Loyola University Chicago, and Deborah Hall, associate professor in the School of Social and Behavioral Sciences at Arizona State University, will share what we know about cyberbullying and will discuss the technology they are developing to promote a positive, relationship based approach to cyberbullying prevention. This podcast was sponsored in part by the Arizona Department of Health Services Must Stop Bullying campaign through its Title V Maternal and Child Health Program. For more information, go to muststopbullying.org. And now, the interview. Yes, I want to start with you, actually. Tell me about the history of your interest in cyberbullying.
My background is in data systems and data analytics. Um, so I did some work as part of my thesis on updating, actually modifying the database engine um, to incorporate new operators that would try to capture similarity between different entities or different objects. But it was early during my time at ASU, around 2013, I believe, that we were just talking with one of my students working in one of the big data projects at the time, Lisa Sossi, and she had shown something I have also seen on TV about, unfortunately now so common cases where teenagers commit suicide, and then we learn about all the situation that was going on in social media, and we just started talking informally, and then we were wondering, even though social media of course brings many positive things to our lives, help us be connected with others that might be far away, um, but we were wondering what kind of technology we have available that helps teenagers and older people even to have healthy uh,
Mm,
online
hmm.
lives, right? So anyways, that conversation started, and then we soon realized there was very little in terms of technology available, apps or actual resources that
Hmm.
beyond reading that could help parents and teens. And also, we realized that there was an space in research where, even though there was a lot that was known about cyberbullying and bullying in general from the psychology perspective, and maybe very, very simple efforts in the computational side, there was really not much in terms of studying at the intersection between what we can do from the computational side and build upon the results that we have already in the psychology domain. So that basically was the beginning. We started informally, meeting, biweekly during the semester, and then little by little we started, building that effort. And then after some time, or I had met already Deborah actually, because we both started at ASU at the same time. We joined ASU in 2010. So, we of course realized very quickly that we really need expertise from the psychology side, somebody who can help us understand, make sense of the theories and frameworks that we have there. And so Deborah was instrumental in terms of building that understanding and helping us integrate really all the results coming from psychology into computational models that we built as part of the program.
Well, that's so wonderful. Thank you, Yaz. And so, Deborah, there's a lot of different behaviors online. We know that people don't always treat each other the best in these digital spaces. What defines cyberbullying and what makes it different from some of these other negative behaviors that we see?
It's a great question. There are a range of different definitions of cyberbullying out there, so you can go to different websites and look at different research papers and see slight variations on the same general theme, which is that it is intentionally hostile, aggressive, hurtful messages or content or interactions that individuals deliver to someone else via some type of electronic form of communication technology, basically. And nowadays we're seeing that primarily taking place on different social media platforms. There are some researchers and some organizations that include other aspects in the definition of cyberbullying, including things like the element of repetition, so the negative interaction occurs over time repetitively, and also, some kind of power differential between the cyberbully and the cyber victim. And these, I think, two elements come from more traditional conceptualizations or definitions of bullying that we see in more physical environments. But I think when you try to translate that definition or those characteristics to an online environment, it becomes all the more challenging. So, how do you define
Right.
repetition in an online interaction?
It's a single act that could be seen by
you can
1,000 people instead of 1,000 acts.
yeah,
Right.
over the course of yeah, exactly, in
Right.
perpetuity. And how do you define power and status in the context of social networks and online interactions? It's not the same as sort of a physical power differential. So these are challenges, and I think the what we're starting to see is that the impact of cyberbullying, because of these unique characteristics that we're just starting to learn more about, can be quite a bit more detrimental and sort of immediately negative, and have what appear to teen victims and child victims really sort of permanent, far-reaching consequences for their well-being and their social lives.
When I've interviewed kids in research about cyberbullying and bullying, I've noticed, and obviously this is in the literature too, that there are different characteristics of online environments and of kids that make them more or less susceptible to these negative messages. And for example, I've heard from kids before that if the negative comments are from somebody that they know, that is far more powerful than if it's just some random person in some in some online environment that's saying hurtful things. And I believe that's in the research too. But I think that your own research, if I'm not mistaken, and that with Yaz, started to look at certain characteristics that might make people more susceptible, or might make certain comments online give them greater potential for harm. So let's talk about that. What are the kind of interactions online that we really need to be worried about?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I can provide an initial answer, but I would like to get Deborah's perspective too, because she was really keen in terms of identifying these factors. So one of the first things that we started doing at the beginning was to identify these potential factors or elements that could increase the probability of somebody to be a victim
Mm-hmm.
of cyberbullying. And then we looked across an array of potential factors, and we look at the literature. In some of these cases, the signals were strong in terms of, like, it was clear that there were some factors that could significantly affect the probability of somebody being a victim of cyberbullying. And some things, for example, are previous experiences of
Mm,
regular bullying. Something that we're actually looking more recently is belonging to some communities. For example, it is I think an agreement in the community, that research community, that if you belong to the
mm,
LGBTQ plus community, then there is an increased risk. There are other dimensions, however, that were a little bit more difficult to assess. And in fact, we found sometimes contradictory results in the literature. And for instance, things like
hmm
gender, a specific age group, that we thought initially it might be an
hmm
indicator, but it didn't end up being like that. Other things, I think, in other cases, for example, the case of race, even though race in general, at least in our reading of the research, hasn't been
Right.
necessarily found to be a core indicator. But we found that there is some work exploring at the intersection between race and other
Right.
dimensions, like gender and sexual orientation, that might actually provide some indicators. So in some cases, I think we need to look a little bit deeper in terms of what specific subgroups um, can be connected with a higher risk of cyberbullying. But I'd like to hear what
Yeah,
Deborah's
Deborah.
perspective is too.
Yeah, so just a couple of things that I would add to that. One, I think, in terms of for whom, particularly looking at teens and children, for whom the impact of cyberbullying might be especially detrimental, I think one thing to look at is sort of the in-person social
Mm,
support and
hmm
network that teens and children have. So if you are if your child is feeling isolated or not included in their physical environments in school, and then they're coming home or going on their phone during outside of class and trying to sort of compensate for the lack of social connection they're feeling in their
hmm
physical environments, then certainly being bullied in online environments can be that much more detrimental because they don't have that additional source of support or acceptance around them
Right.
to help kind of buffer that negative impact. I'd say another thing is just kind of an interrelated set of factors that deal with why the child or teen is using is using technology or social media to begin with. And obviously, we all have shades of different
Right.
motives. But again, if it's your primary source of validation or social support or perceived status, you're trying to be an influencer, that can
Mm,
certainly lead to a greater connection between the teen or child's sense of identity and positive self-worth and their interactions online. And then the last thing I would just say is that there seems to be a pretty consistent finding that teens and children who perform more risky online
hmm
behaviors or who spend more time in online environments are those who are at higher risk for being cyberbullied to begin
Right.
with. And so I think the risky behavior and sort of putting yourself out there in online environments without a whole lot of guidance or
Right.
parental intervention or support can also kind of be a predictor of a greater negative impact that these negative interactions can have.
I'm so glad you said that because, and that you said it that way, because I think that there is a lot of there are a lot of people in this space that talk about the cyber environment causing these things, and not being the result of these things. And I like the way that you stated it, that they are spending a lot more time online without those, maybe in the absence of those personal relationships, because we don't necessarily know if the technology is causing the problems IRL in real life, or if the teen is spending more time online because they don't have that social support outside of it. I tend to think it's the latter, but I know that there are people that this is an ongoing debate. But I also know that you put all this information together and you started to work on a product. You've been working on Bully Blocker for a long time. Can you describe a little bit about what Bully Blocker is and what makes it unique?
I can provide an initial answer on that. So Bully Blocker is really the name of our project, and then we have been working a lot in terms of developing models, particularly predictive models that incorporate um, some elements of certain insights or frameworks that we have learned from psychology, and to inform the design of better predictive models on the computational side. So we have implemented various models using, for example, um, components that try to identify the personal aspects of how an individual interacts in social media, or trying to assess the influence that a given individual gets from
Mm-hmm.
their peers. And then we have also, in parallel to that, we have been involved in an effort of building applications that incorporate some of our models into mobile apps that we can make available to parents and teens. So one of the first applications that we did was the Bully Blocker app, and this was released actually in the App Store a few years back. And that model, or that application basically had as a goal to be able to capture um, a number of indicators that might increase the risk of somebody to experience cyberbullying. And then it also analyze some of the interactions of a given, let's say, teenager with their network, and then analyze that content, all of these happening directly in the device, so there was no data sent to any type of server. But the result of that was an assessment of the
Mm-hmm.
likelihood that this individual would be experiencing cyberbullying. And so we call that the bullying rank. And so that application was available for some time, but now we are actually involved in the development of a new app that we call the Action Point app, that hopefully will be being released later this year, where we take a kind of like a different goal. Um, and what we are trying to do in this Action Point app is to build on the
Mm-hmm.
findings of good strategies to create a good relationship between parents and teens, and then create a set of activities in a mobile application to be able to encourage or facilitate parents and teenagers to build those that good
Mm-hmm.
understanding in the context of cyberbullying. So there are some action points oriented to um, have, for example, an understanding of what are the rules for their social media use at home, and to see if the understanding of the teenagers is aligned with the understanding of the parents. And there is also
Oh, interesting.
a component in this action point app that includes still an identification or a detection component for cyberbullying, but now it's in a broader
Right.
set of activities, let's say. Yeah.
And again, I want to step back just a little bit because I'm enjoying you talking about predictive modeling, but I want to make sure that my audience understands exactly what you're talking about. And Deborah, I hope you'll chime in and help me explain this. But unless I'm mistaken, what Bully Blocker was doing was it wasn't just preventing certain words or looking for or looking for certain combinations of words that might be harmful, but it was really trying to understand who the user was, who the kid was, and put them in a context by looking at their normal patterns and looking for changes that might raise a red flag that this interaction is no longer normal. This interaction is going in a place that could be potentially harmful. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. So the initial app that we had been working on drew actual content from the teen's or child's social media
Right.
Facebook page in particular, and used specific information such as number of insulting
Yeah.
words or changes in number of friends, or a dramatic increase or oftentimes with cyberbullying, a dramatic decrease in number of connections, so
Right.
blocking a lot of people in a short period of time, to calculate a numeric index that could convey to parents degree of relative risk. But it didn't actually communicate to the parent, like, this is what was said to
Right.
your child. It respected that level of content related privacy, but hoped to kind of convey, hey, this is a change in risk that you might want to talk to or you probably do want to, start to talk to your child about. The approach that we're taking with the app that we are now working on, and that kind of got, there were barriers to the forward movement of
Right.
that initial app due to privacy changes in Facebook, but
Well,
we
and the
were
fact that
already
kids
seeing
left
that a lot of,
Facebook right after you built it, right? And
exactly,
this is going
yeah,
to always be.
yeah,
I talk about this a lot. When we think about mechanizing oversight, when we think about automating relationship, we're always one step behind because the kids are always going to a different technology, a different platform. So you took that into account in Action Point. So yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
oh, no, no, no problem. And that's exactly true. So the moment that we as adults find out about a certain
Yeah.
platform or trend, it's no longer cool. So,
Right.
so the app that we're working on is, platform agnostic in that it doesn't rely in any way on a specific information coming in or integration with any specific social media platform. It's really geared more towards strengthening the knowledge, awareness, and sort of strength of the shared communication and understanding that families
Yeah.
have. And I should also mention that this is based on empirical findings within
Yeah.
social science research literatures, education, developmental psychology, family dynamics. So these aren't just sort of things that we brainstormed as being like good ideas. We're basing these activities that we're recommending to parents on actual studies that show, hey, this is a good way to reduce your child's risk of engaging in
Yeah.
these types of problematic behaviors, or this is something you can do to strengthen the communication ties that will then make it more likely that your teen or child will feel comfortable talking to when situations come up.
That's so very, very important. And I think that it's what I like is, and as you mentioned, it draws on a much larger body of research, of science, on exactly how you can create positive outcomes for kids. And every time we see something bad happen in a kid's life, whether it be something as horrible as a school shooting or cyberbullying, we kind of rush to create tools. So we'll lock down a school, we'll put in cameras and we'll put in metal detectors, or we will lock down a phone. And what we know from many, many studies is that doesn't help the kids very much at all. And in fact, sometimes it can create this false sense of security such that we actually stop doing the thing that is beneficial, which is being present in the lives of our kids, right? So this app is going to actually help parents be present, have those conversations, and it will do some monitoring as well, you said?
It has a small component for monitoring, and Deborah mentioned that there were some changes in terms of what type of information social
Hmm.
media platforms allowed applications to access, and that has changed significantly in the last few years. So uh, we do some type of assessment, but really not
Okay.
relying on any specific network. Instead, relying on information that both the parent and the teenager can share through a subset of surveys. Something I wanted to mention that was closely aligned about with something you were both of you were mentioning, this idea of parents sometimes not knowing about the latest social
Yeah.
media that the kids are using, is that we created this one of the tools inside of the Action Point app is primarily to provide or to share this understanding with parents, so teenagers take the role of the
Hmm.
experts and in social media, and so they kind of like teach parents or help parents understand the
Right.
particular aspects of the new social media platforms that they are using. So yeah, we're very excited
Oh,
about
that's
it.
so cool.
We're really looking forward to making it available.
That I mean, I'm really excited about that because obviously that's a hallmark of a positive relationship is when you aren't just the receiver of knowledge in the relationship, but the provider. when you can do that, it really strengthens the bond. That's very exciting. Deborah, what are some of the prompts that you might see in the app around, conversations or techniques for having these conversations and strengthening relationships?
Yeah, great question. So in one sort of specific set of tasks or activities, we actually have parents and teens take sort of a brief survey on the phone that pertain to their perceptions of what their household guidelines
Mm,
are. So, do you have any restrictions on what platforms you can use or how much time or when and where you can, be on your phone? And so we ask parents and teens both sort of what their understanding of their current household guidelines
yes.
or rules are, as well as what they think, might be that ideal amount of time for, people of their age or, even of the adults as well. And then there's sort of a side-by-side comparison of how the responses of the teen and the parent line up. And this is based on sort of being able to highlight where there's clear communication,
Right.
understanding, and consensus, and where there are differences that perhaps the parents in particular might not have been aware of. So I think that it's not just, obviously teens might think that, much more social media use is
Right.
ideal or is okay, whereas parents might not. But also things like, parents thinking that they've communicated their expectations or that certain guidelines or rules in the household are being adhered to when maybe they haven't communicated them as clearly, or they've kind of said it one time and then let things slide. It happens
Oh,
in my
yeah.
family a lot. Like I say something and then I don't enforce it with my child as often, and then it just becomes questionable whether that rule actually still exists. So it's kind of getting them on the same page, and getting them to talk about and clarify what the sort of guidelines and shared expectations might be. Another sort of prompt or set of tasks deal with sort of testing your social media
Mm,
IQ for both the parent and the teen, and that's really around the goal, as Yasin said, of getting the teen to or child to potentially be the teacher or the mentor about different social media platforms. And the idea there is just that, a teen might be much less likely to go to the parent and say, oh my gosh, this cyberbullying incident happened where this person DM'd me and did
mm,
this, and then the snap went away, and, whatever, TikTok or whatever. And if a parent has no idea what these things are, the teen might be like, well, I don't even want to bother trying to
right.
mention the situation because it's so complicated and they don't know what a snap is or they don't know what this is. So it's kind of having them test their social media IQ in maybe a more competitive, like, what do you
Right.
know, mom, dad, or, grandma or whoever the caregiver or guardian is, but then allowing that to lead into a discussion where the teen or child, helps the parent better understand some of these more nuanced aspects of the current social media platform.
Very exciting. Very exciting. And this app is going to be available shortly. Is that right? When can parents, teachers, and other direct service providers begin to see this app?
Yes, so we are actually just this week we are finishing with a final round of minor adjustments and testing, and I believe in about a week or two we will start then the process of approval for the App Store, and then hopefully releasing the app as soon as that process is completed. So I would expect that maybe in the next couple of months or so uh, we should be releasing it.
Fantastic. And I will keep all the listeners apprised of when it is available. And Deborah and Yassine, I want to thank you so much, not just for your work on this product, but for your approach that is smart, that's about families and kids, that's about data and science. I'm really grateful that you're out there working on this. Thanks so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Brad.
you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
That was Yasin Silva and Deborah Hall. For more information about them and the Bully Blocker Project, please visit talkingaboutkids.com. From there, you also can find out about upcoming episodes, suggest a topic, learn more about me and my books, or submit your questions for future guests. Our theme song is by The Senators. For more of their music, go to thesenatorsmusic.com. And remember, kids are young goats and young children. And the difference is that young goats are easier to manage.